let's get to Jonathan Fenton-Harvey. He's live in the United Kingdom. Jonathan, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me, John. It's good to be back.
Just give us an update on the United Kingdom. You know, it started, Boris Johnson kind of disengaged with COVID-19, wanted to go to herd immunity. Then they got a spike. Then they went overboard. What's the story now there?
So we're slowly easing our lockdown here. The lockdown's been in place since late March, and it only went into lockdown because there was so much pressure and criticism of Boris Johnson's herd immunity approach, and that's clearly paid off. Well, that's clearly had noticeable impacts. It's already been criticised, but because our lockdown went in so late, because we delayed it by 7 days, that had huge impacts on the actual amount of deaths that occurred in the end. According to, if you look at all studies on all excess deaths across the world, we actually have the highest percent deaths per million from COVID-19 in the world. So it's clearly hit us hard. So like I said last time, we were predicted to become the worst hit country in all of Europe, and that seems to have manifested just because we were quite late to act on this issue. So we're slowly opening up now. I think more and more people are getting frustrated with the lockdown. Particularly, it's just hard to keep people contained indoors if you think about it. So you've got more people going out to parks. Beaches across the country have been packed, especially since it's sunny weather, so that encourages people to go out more. And I think recently there's been more criticisms of the government. You may have heard of a case of Dominic Cummings, one of our senior ministers here.
Yes.
He actually travelled from London to Durham, so that's hundreds of miles to arrange for his daughter, who was ill, to be taken care of. So that's actually breaching the government's own lockdown advice. So there's been a huge media storm against him because of that. The criticism, even from private media outlets that are usually favourable towards the current Conservative government, are really on his case. And then he also took a very long journey in his car, which he admitted recently, which he said was to test his eyesight. So he took a long journey in his car, apparently to make sure he could see properly. So he's also breaking the law with that as well, technically. So that's just really damaged faith in the government's approach alongside... I mean, to be honest, approval ratings for the government did increase after it went into lockdown, but now it's plummeting rapidly. So I think this government's reputation is in trouble because of the scandal with Dominic Cummings, one of our own senior ministers. I think most people did obey the social distancing rules and guidelines, and many people did stay at home. So to see a minister like that actually go out and break his own government's guidelines has revealed a lot of hypocrisy in the government. So more and more people are going out now. And with talks of a second wave, of course, I mean, that no one knows for sure when that's going to happen. It is predicted in winter or other parts of the year, but if more people keep going out, then it's going to leave the government with some issues it has to deal with.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We're live today in Cape May, New Jersey. Great to have you with us. We're with Jonathan Fenton-Harvey. He's live in London, United Kingdom right now, and he is a senior contributor writer for my number one site on the Middle East, Inside Arabia. Go to InsideArabia.com. That is the only site I read. It's got the best news and the best analysis. It's based right where I am in Washington, D.C. Go to InsideArabia.com. Jonathan, when you talk about the deaths in the UK from COVID-19, what we're seeing in the United States is that the overwhelming majority, 81% of the 100,000 deaths in the U.S. are people over 65 years old, the majority of those with compromised problems with their health. And if you go over 85, it's over 50% of the U.S. So we're kind of finding out here that if you're over 85, if you've got obesity, if you've got asthma, compromised situations, this virus can be lethal. We're also finding out if you're under 65 and you're healthy, your chances of dying from COVID-19 are the same as being run over by a cruise ship. They're virtually 0.001%. Are you seeing the same thing in England?
Yeah, it definitely seems to be like a universal trend in many places, but it is elderly people who are affected more. Obviously, there are some exceptions. For example, even babies have died of coronavirus cases, and so have other younger people in their teen years and early 20s as well. But you're right, it does seem to affect a majority of older people. I think that one of the biggest concerns was that, also I just wanted to point out that we've had nearly, the exact figure isn't fully recorded, but I think it's nearly 10,000 deaths in care homes alone. So that just shows that it is easily able to spread throughout elderly populations. But one of the main concerns was that if we didn't contain the virus, the healthcare system would be overrun.
Right.
I mean, if we look at cases if we look at Italy, for example, they had to turn away people who are over 60 or over 65 from life-saving treatment, from ventilators, because they just didn't have the resources to treat everyone. So that was one of the arguments in favour of going into lockdown to prevent this, because in this time, ambulance services have been a lot slower. For example, I know someone who was attacked by a dog recently, and they had to wait like a long time to get an ambulance come over. One didn't come in the end, so people nearby had to drive them to the hospital. Again, that's one example. And there's also a reduction of other essential treatments. Like, people have avoided going to the hospital because of other cases, like cancer and stuff.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We're with senior contributor to Inside Arabia, live in London, England, Jonathan Fenton-Harvey. You can read him. Go to InsideArabia.com, based in Washington, D.C. Jonathan's in England. Jonathan, one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on today, other than to get the update on the UK, is you had a great piece in Inside Arabia titled "The Coronavirus Was Used to Consolidate Egypt's Military Rule." Basically, President Sisi, after his junta, took advantage of this in order to increase power. And I wanted to get you on to talk about Egypt, because we're kind of seeing the same thing in the United States. What you're not seeing in England, you're seeing that in the United States, where these governors are usurping all of this power that they've accumulated through these emergency orders. Your article on Egypt was fascinating, because it's like the old saying, right? Never let a crisis go to waste. What is happening there?
Yeah, so I think Egypt's a very interesting case, and it's a very relevant one as well, because obviously the Sisi government is backed and it is very close with Western governments, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom here. So it's hard to know the full scale of what's happening in Egypt at the moment. For example, they've reported 20,000 cases so far. That's their reported cases, but that's likely covered up, because independent studies showed that was the number in mid-March. Okay. Mm-hmm. One opposition group said this week that because it's being covered up so much, and because the authorities aren't actually dealing with the problem in Egypt, then Egypt could become the next Wuhan. So that's crazy if you think about it.
Right.
It could have spread extensively by now, and there could be a lot more cases. I mean, it's a very highly populated country. There's nearly 100 million people there, and there's been a lot of criticisms from medical workers, particularly doctors, who have resigned recently, blaming the government for not actually addressing the crisis and being responsible for it, because they haven't taken enough actions. So, and even in Cairo itself, it's a very densely populated city. There's 20 million people just in the capital alone. And I've spoke to friends there, and people there say that people are still going out anyway. The streets are still very crowded. So it's like people just want to work anyway and still try and make a living. And I guess this is one of the paradoxes or problems in a country that has economic problems. Because if you went into lockdown, that would make people cut off from earning a living, which would create more problems if you think about it. Because there's a whole debate about problems that come alongside the lockdown, mental health problems, economic issues. So that's more relevant for countries like Egypt, for example. But
so
even
Go ahead, Jonathan. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, even though people have tried raising awareness about this, there's been a huge crackdown on journalists and civil society activists who have tried to raise awareness about this issue. Because there was like I said, there were independent studies showing highlighting the true case of coronavirus in Egypt that had spread significantly. And there was one reporter from The Guardian who was actually deported in late March because she tried reporting on one of these studies. So she's a British journalist, and she had worked there for a while, and she's one of many other journalists, foreign journalists, who have been targeted or treated harshly by the authorities. Mm-hmm. So it shows Egypt it's been described as an open-air prison by people who are journalists or critics of the regime inside the country, because it tries to... The military regime is not just the president who controls it. Really, you've got a military that operates as a kind of mafia that's really the shadow government. So they have cracked down on any form of opposition and free thinking, and that's particularly ramped up in the time of coronavirus.
We're with Jonathan Fenton-Harvey, senior analyst and contributor to InsideArabia.com, my number one site for news in the Middle East. That's where I go every day. First thing I do, I go to InsideArabia.com. Best analysis, best news, no nonsense, right? Fabulous. Go to InsideArabia.com. We're with Jonathan Fenton-Harvey now. Tell us about May 14th, Jonathan. In your article, you talk about security officials burst into the home of Hassan Magoub, correspondent for the Egyptian daily paper there. They arrested him on charges of fake news, and along with their freelance photographer. So the guy works for the paper, and the government handcuffs him and puts him in jail for writing what they called was fake news in a paper that is published in Egypt. And it's the Egyptian Daily. What the hell is going on there?
Well, the charges aren't exactly clear. I mean, fake news is often used in many countries as just an excuse to dismiss people who write something that you don't agree with. So there was, like you said, there was a freelance photographer who was also detained under similar charges. So this has been a huge pretext from the government to actually crack down. Like I said, the government tries to stop any narrative or any point of view that criticizes it or dissents from it. It really tries to shape public opinion in that way, just forcefully controlling it. So fake news is often utilized a lot to crack down on that. There have been many other cases. For example, the editor of Mada, which is the leading opposition newspaper in Egypt, was recently detained as well, the actual editor of his newspaper. So that just really reflects how Egypt is trying to crack down on any kind of form of independent media. So cases like this have occurred rapidly. For example, there was the case of Shadi Mohammed as well. He was a 24-year-old video journalist, and he was arrested 2 years ago for making a documentary that was mocking the president. And now, well, this past month he died in prison, and he's only 24. So that case itself really caused an outrage and a lot of criticism towards the regime because of how it mistreats people who just like to think differently from the regime. It's a hypersensitive one. It won't take any form of criticism. Like I said, this has been going on since 2013,
right? Since
the military actually launched a counter-revolution, and since then, I don't think there's been a time in the modern history of Egypt where repression has been so widespread and rife.
I mean, it's unbelievable, Jonathan. We're with Jonathan Fenton-Harvey, senior contributor, Inside Arabia. Go to InsideArabia.com. They're based in Washington, D.C. Jonathan is in London, England, did a piece on Inside Arabia on the abuses of the Egyptian government now, basically because of the COVID-19 lockdown. They're taking advantage of it. I don't know what they mean. How do you arrest somebody over what you're saying is fake news. The other thing is they arrested the photographer. Well, the photographer's just taking pictures. How can a picture be fake? It's a picture, right?
He was also accused of working with a terrorist organization as well, but then that could be very vague because the Egyptian government has used the pretext of countering terrorism, or what it calls terrorism, to crack down on anyone in civil society. So, as I was going to say, after 2013, the military regime obviously targeted the Muslim Brotherhood government that was democratically elected the previous year. And since then, it's used as a pretext, cracking down on the Muslim Brotherhood to target anyone who disagrees with the regime. And that's been really abused, this whole label of fighting the Muslim Brotherhood. I remember in summer 2018, people were protesting in Egypt because of the increase of metro prices. So metro prices had tripled. And the actual Minister of Transport himself said that the Muslim Brotherhood had organised these protests against the metro prices increasing.
Well,
so that just shows that it's used to, this whole label of terrorism or fake news is used just to stop any opposition. Abused massively.
Really, the message for Americans in Egypt, which is this came after President Sisi ratified, as was in your article, Jonathan, new amendments to Egypt's 1958 emergency law, which he presented as a strategy to combat the coronavirus pandemic. But now the measures, which are now appearing, went by people because they were focused on the pandemic. Now they have to do with journalism and everything else. So they basically, what Sisi did is he took the opportunity of the coronavirus to expand his emergency powers, which will now go on in perpetuity. The reason why I was so anxious to get you on today, Jonathan, is in the United States, we are seeing the same thing with these governors who have all of a sudden usurped this unbelievable power that, quite frankly, Jonathan, no one even had any idea they had. But under these emergency orders now, they're able to shut businesses down, restrict travel, tell people to stay home, shut down universities, schools, whatever they want, having you do certain things like you can't go out in a kayak, but you can go out in a canoe. I mean, just crazy stuff. But we're finding, they took advantage of the crisis, and now they have all this power. Is this ever going to end in Egypt now that they have it, that Sisi has it? Is he going to get up one day and say, "Oh, pandemic's over, I'm going to get rid of all my new powers"? Is that ever going to happen?
Well, the thing is, this is quite a traditional constitution. Like you said, the emergency law has been there since 1958. So these are actually new changes to this law, and they're going to be long-lasting now. So some of these changes might seem, expected attempts to tackle the coronavirus that you would expect from other governments, such as quarantining Egyptians from returning abroad, and also there's restrictions of public and private gatherings. So obviously on the surface that might appear to be a change to actually stop people gathering and spreading the virus. But then if you think about how the Egyptian regime has actually acted, it's cracked down on protests in the past quite forcefully. So if it's able to restrict public and private gatherings, effectively make them illegal and outlaw them, then that just shows in the future, even when the pandemic is over, it will still be able to control whether or not people can get involved in public gatherings and actually get involved in demonstrations. So in short, what they're doing is trying to outlaw demonstrations or protests. And this is quite a relevant point, actually, because Egypt has been in a state of emergency since, every year, apart from 2012 and 2017, for the last several decades. So while they're in a state of emergency, they can actually ban these public and private gatherings. So basically what they're doing, if they're always in a state of emergency, they'll always be able to restrict protests. That's what they're trying to do.
Unbelievable. Jonathan Fenton-Harvey, we're out of time. I really want to thank you for being with us live in London, England. Jonathan, always good to have you on. Go to InsideArabia.com, InsideArabia.com.